So, here is something worth thinking about as you settle in tonight, in the quiet, in the dark, as the room grows still around you. Far out beyond the planets, further than the mind likes to travel, there is a small machine drifting through the dark. It has no power left. It sends no signal. No one has heard from it in over 20 years. And yet it is still out there, still moving, still on its way, exactly as it has been for more than half a century. Its name is Pioneer 10. And tonight, we are going to follow it all the way out to where it is now, and then onward to where it is going. You do not need to stay awake for any of it. Pioneer 10 was a scout. It went first. Before the more famous voyagers, before almost anything, this one small spacecraft went out ahead, into places no machine had ever been, to see whether the way was safe. It was the first thing we ever sent across the great belt of asteroids. It was the first thing we ever sent to fly close by Jupiter. It was, for a time, the most distant and the fastest object human beings had ever made. It opened the road to the outer solar system for everything that followed. And then, its work done, it kept going, out and out, into the dark between the stars. It is quiet now. That is the first thing to understand, and it is a gentle thing, not a sad one. The last time anyone on Earth heard from Pioneer 10 was in the early days of 2003. Its power had faded over the long decades, until at last its voice was too faint to reach us across the enormous distance, and so it fell silent. But falling silent is not the same as stopping. The spacecraft did not stop. It did not slow. It did not fall. It simply kept drifting, onward, as it always had, and as it always will, long after every one of us is gone. This is a story about that drifting. It is a story about where a silent spacecraft goes once there is no one left to guide it and no one left to hear it. Because Pioneer 10 is going somewhere. Not quickly. Not on any schedule we would recognize. But it has a direction, out there in the dark, and if you follow that direction far enough, across an almost unimaginable stretch of time, you arrive at a particular star. A red star, in the constellation of the Bull, a star called Aldebaran. That is where Pioneer 10 is heading, and it will take about 2 million years to get there. You do not need to follow every step of this tonight. You do not need to hold the dates, or the numbers, or the names. If you drift off somewhere over Jupiter, that is perfectly fine. The little spacecraft will keep drifting whether or not you are listening, just as it has drifted through every night of your life so far, without ever needing your attention. The point tonight is not to learn. The point is to rest, and to let your mind wander gently out along the path this old scout has taken, out past everything familiar, into the calm and endless dark, where it is still, at this very moment, quietly on its way. Let us begin at the beginning then, on the ground, in the years before it flew. Because before Pioneer 10 was a ghost ship drifting toward a distant star, it was an idea, and a rather frightening one. The idea was to send a machine somewhere no machine had ever survived, out past Mars, through the asteroid belt, which many people feared might tear any spacecraft to pieces, and on to Jupiter, the giant, with its deadly storms of radiation. No one knew in those first years whether such a journey could be made at all. Someone had to go first to find out. That someone was Pioneer 10. To understand why Pioneer 10 mattered so much, you have to go back to how little we knew. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, we had barely left home. Machines had reached the moon. A few had gone to Venus and to Mars, our near neighbors. But the outer solar system, the realm of the giant planets, was still completely untouched. No spacecraft had gone past Mars, And between us and the giants lay a barrier that worried a great many people: the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt is a wide ring of rocky bodies orbiting the Sun, out beyond Mars, before you reach Jupiter. There are millions of them. Some are tiny. A few are hundreds of kilometers across. And in those days, no one was sure how crowded it really was. Some scientists feared it might be thick with dust and debris, a shooting gallery, a place where a spacecraft would be sandblasted or struck and destroyed before it ever reached the far side. Would anything survive the crossing? No one knew. It had never been tried, and you cannot send a machine to Jupiter if it cannot first get past the belt. So the first great question that Pioneer 10 was built to answer was simply this: can we get through? Can a spacecraft cross the asteroid belt and come out the other side still working? Everything else, all the science, all the pictures of Jupiter, depended on that first, frightening step. Pioneer 10 was, before anything else, a test, a scout sent into unknown country to see whether the road was passable at all. The spacecraft they built for this was not large. It weighed only a few hundred kilograms, light enough to be flung outward at great speed. At its heart was a wide dish antenna, about 2.5 meters across, always kept pointed back toward the distant Earth, so the spacecraft could listen and speak across the growing gulf. Behind the dish was the body, holding the instruments and the electronics, and reaching out on long booms, held away from everything else, were the sources of its power, kept at a distance because they were gently radioactive, and their warmth was best kept away from the delicate instruments. We will come back to that power later, because its slow fading is what finally silenced the spacecraft. But it was there from the very first day, quietly at work. Pioneer 10 was spin-stabilized, which is a simple and elegant idea. The whole spacecraft turned slowly, several times a minute, like a spinning top or a thrown discus. And just as a spinning top stays upright, the spinning kept the spacecraft steady. Its dish pointed the right way, without any need for complicated systems to hold it in place. It was a robust design, made to survive a long time with as little as possible to go wrong. And go a long time it did. It was meant to last about 2 years, long enough to reach Jupiter. It lasted more than 30. It carried a set of instruments to study the space it flew through, and the worlds it passed. There were detectors for the charged particles streaming from the Sun. There were instruments to measure magnetic fields, and cosmic rays, and dust. And there was a device that was not quite a camera in the way we think of one, but which could build up an image of Jupiter, line by line, as the spacecraft spun, sweeping across the planet a sliver at a time and piecing the slivers together into a picture. It was clever, and it was simple, and it was exactly suited to a small spinning machine far from home. It launched on the 2nd of March, 1972, from Cape Canaveral in Florida, riding an Atlas Centaur rocket, and it left in a hurry. Pioneer 10 was sent off faster than anything had ever been sent before, fast enough to cross the distance to the Moon in only about 11 hours, a trip that had taken the Apollo astronauts around 3 days. It was, in that moment, the fastest human-made object ever launched. It raced away from the Earth, out past the Moon's orbit within half a day, and set off across the solar system toward the belt, and toward Jupiter beyond it. For the first few months, the flight was calm. Out past the orbit of Mars, into the widening dark, the Sun shrinking slowly behind it. And then, in the summer of 1972, Pioneer 10 reached the edge of the asteroid belt and began the crossing that everyone had worried about. This was the moment of truth. This was the whole reason it had been sent first. Would it get through? For 7 long months, It flew through the belt, its dust detectors counting the tiny impacts, the team on Earth watching anxiously, waiting to see whether their scout would survive. And here is the quiet surprise. The first great thing Pioneer 10 taught us. The asteroid belt was nearly empty. Not a shooting gallery at all. Not a wall of rock and dust. The spacecraft crossed the entire belt without ever coming close to being harmed, striking nothing larger than the smallest specks of dust. It turned out that the asteroid belt, for all its millions of bodies, is so vast, and those bodies are so far apart, that flying through it is less like crossing a minefield and more like crossing an almost empty room in which a few grains of sand happen to be floating. The great feared barrier was not a barrier at all. Pioneer 10 had opened the road, and beyond it, growing brighter every week, lay the largest planet in the solar system. Sit with that surprise for a moment. For years, people had feared the belt. They pictured a wall of stone, a storm of flying rock, a place that would smash any machine to pieces. And what did the little scout find? Almost nothing. A few grains of dust here and there, wide, dark, empty space in between. How could that be, with millions of asteroids out there? Because the belt is vast, truly vast. The asteroids are real, but they are scattered across a space so enormous that they sit, on average, hundreds of thousands of kilometers apart. Farther than the Earth is from the Moon. So flying through the belt is not like crossing a minefield. It is more like walking across a huge dark hall with a few specks of dust drifting somewhere inside it. You could cross it 1,000 times and never touch a thing. That was the first gift of the scout. It turned a wall of fear into an open door. And is that not often the way? The thing we dread is usually emptier than we imagine. Pioneer 10 flew in to test the fear, and it came out the far side, whole and quiet and unharmed. The road was open. It had always been open. We simply had not known. Jupiter is a world almost beyond imagining. It is the largest planet in the solar system, so large that every other planet could fit inside it, with room to spare. It is not a solid world. There is no surface to land on. It is a vast spinning ball of gas and liquid, wrapped in bands of cloud, stirred by storms that have raged for centuries. And when Pioneer 10 approached it, at the end of 1973, no spacecraft had ever been near it. Everything we knew of Jupiter, we knew from far away, through telescopes. Pioneer 10 was about to change that, and to face a danger no machine had met before. The danger was radiation. Jupiter is wrapped in enormous belts of trapped high-energy particles, held in place by its immense magnetic field, far stronger and far deadlier than anything around the Earth. As Pioneer 10 flew closer, it plunged into those belts, and it took a dose of radiation that would have killed a human being many times over, a dose far higher than its makers had expected. The radiation began to confuse its electronics. Some of its instruments sent back false readings. A few commands went astray. For a while it seemed the little spacecraft might be overwhelmed before it completed its pass. But it held on. It flew through the worst of it, closer to Jupiter than anything had ever been, and it came out the other side, battered but alive, carrying its precious data. Think about how blind that approach was. No one had done it. No one knew how bad the radiation would be. And it was worse than anyone guessed. Far worse. The invisible storm of particles poured through the little machine. Its electronics grew confused. False readings came back. A few commands went astray. Would it survive the pass? For a while, no one on Earth could be sure, and there was nothing they could do. Jupiter was so far away that any command took most of an hour to arrive. By the time they saw a problem, it was already long over. So they could only watch and wait and hope. And the little scout held on. It was tougher than its troubles. It flew through the very worst of the radiation, closer to the giant than anything had ever dared, and it came out the other side, battered, confused, but alive, and carrying, in its small memory, the first close measurements of the fiercest place in the solar system. Why does that matter so much? Because everything that came after used it. The scout took the blows, so the travelers behind it would not have to, and what it saw was the giant, up close, for the very first time. Pioneer 10 passed within about 130,000 kilometers of Jupiter's cloud tops, and its slow spinning imager built up picture after picture, line by line, as the planet swelled beneath it. It saw the bands of cloud in detail no telescope could match. It saw the great red spot, that vast swirling storm larger than the whole Earth, turning slowly in the atmosphere. It measured the fierce radiation and mapped the magnetic field and studied the tiny amount of heat rising from within the planet, and found, to everyone's interest, that Jupiter gives off more heat than it receives from the sun, that it has a warmth of its own, left over from its birth, still leaking slowly out into space. Let that odd little fact rest gently with you. Jupiter gives off more heat than it receives. Think about what that means. The sun shines on it, yes, but Jupiter shines back more than it takes in. Where does the extra warmth come from? Not from any fire inside. There is no fire. It is old heat, leftover heat, warmth from the day the planet was born, 4.5 billion years ago, still slowly leaking out into the cold. Jupiter is, in a sense, still cooling from its own creation, still glowing, faintly, with the warmth of its beginning, and it will go on cooling for billions of years more. Pioneer 10 was the first to feel that warmth up close, the first to measure it. A whole giant planet, quietly radiating the heat of its birth, out into the dark, and a small machine flying past to notice. Is it not strange and lovely that a planet can hold its first warmth for so long? We do the same, in a smaller way. We carry the warmth of where we came from, quietly, for our whole lives. There is a lovely detail here worth resting on. Pioneer 10 was the first, but it was also, in a way, a scout for the greater missions to come. Everything it learned about the radiation around Jupiter, the doses, the danger, the places where it was worst, was used to protect the spacecraft that came after it. When the Voyagers flew to Jupiter a few years later, they were built tougher, and their paths were planned more carefully because Pioneer 10 had gone first and shown them what to expect. The scout took the blows so the others would not have to. That is what a pioneer does. It goes into the unknown, and it suffers the surprises, so that those who follow can travel a little more safely. There is something quietly noble in that, if you let yourself feel it as you drift. But Jupiter gave Pioneer 10 more than danger and data. It gave it a push. As the spacecraft swung close by the giant planet, it did something that had never been done at a planet so far away. It used Jupiter's enormous gravity as a slingshot. Flying close by the moving planet, Pioneer 10 was caught briefly by that gravity, whipped around, and flung outward, faster than before, on a new path. It stole, ever so slightly, a tiny share of Jupiter's motion. Jupiter, being so vast, never noticed the loss. But for the little spacecraft, that borrowed speed was everything. It was flung onto a path that would carry it up and out of the solar system altogether, away from the sun, out toward the stars, faster than it could ever have gone on its own. Pause on that trick for a moment, because it is a beautiful one. How do you make a small machine go faster, without more fuel? You borrow. You fly close to a giant moving planet, and you steal, just a little, from its motion. Jupiter is racing around the sun, carrying its enormous weight along with it. Pioneer 10 slipped in close, was caught briefly by that motion, swung around, and flung outward. It took a tiny sip of Jupiter's speed. Did Jupiter mind? Jupiter never noticed. The planet is so vast that the loss was less than nothing to it. But for the little spacecraft, that borrowed speed changed everything. It was the difference between falling back toward the sun and climbing away forever. The difference between a visitor and a traveler. One close pass, one gentle theft. And the Scout was launched, a second time, not by any rocket, but by a planet, out toward the stars. It is still coasting on that borrowed speed tonight. It always will be. That moment at Jupiter is when Pioneer 10 stopped being a planetary explorer and became something else, something new. It became an interstellar spacecraft, aimed out of the solar system, on a one-way journey with no destination but the dark. From that point on, it would never pass another planet. It would never be caught by anything again. It would simply climb and climb away from the sun, slowing very gradually against the sun's distant pull, but never stopping, out toward the edge of the solar system and beyond. The Scout had done its first great job. It had crossed the belt and survived Jupiter and opened the road. Now it began the longer journey, the one that has no end, the one it is still on tonight. Let yourself sit with that turning point for a moment, because it is a gentle one to fall asleep on. A small machine, built to last 2 years, built simply to reach one planet and take some readings, had done all of that, and then been flung onward, by the very planet it came to study, out into a journey that would last not 2 years, but 2 million. It did not choose this. It did not know. It simply followed the path that Jupiter's gravity had drawn for it, the way a leaf follows a current, out and out, into the dark, without complaint, without fear, without any sense at all of how far it had to go. It is still following that path now. It has been following it your whole life. There is something bolted to the side of Pioneer 10 that has nothing to do with science, and everything to do with the strangeness and the hopefulness of being human. It is a small plaque made of gold anodized aluminum about the size of a car license plate, engraved with a picture. It was the first physical message that human beings ever sent out of the solar system, meant not for us, but for whoever or whatever might one day find this small machine drifting in the dark long after we are gone. The Voyagers, a few years later, would carry their golden records. But Pioneer 10 went first, with this simpler thing, a single engraved picture, our first note to the universe. The idea came together quickly and almost by chance. A journalist had pointed out that Pioneer 10 would be the first object ever to leave the solar system, and wondered aloud whether it should carry some message. The astronomer Carl Sagan took up the idea, together with his colleague Frank Drake. They had only a few weeks to design something, and the drawing itself was made by Linda Salzman Sagan, an artist. Between them, in that short time, they had to decide how to say, in a single picture, to a mind that shares no language with us, no history with us, perhaps nothing at all with us, here is who we are, and here is where we live. What they engraved is quietly beautiful. There is a drawing of a man and a woman, standing, the man with his hand raised in a gesture of greeting. Behind them, drawn to scale, is the outline of the Pioneer spacecraft itself, so that a finder might judge how large the two figures are compared to the machine they made. There is a diagram of a hydrogen atom, the most common thing in the universe, used as a kind of universal ruler and clock, a way of setting the scale for everything else on the plaque. And there is a map. Not a map of streets or countries, but a map of something far more lasting. The map shows the position of our sun, marked at the center of a starburst of lines. Each line points toward a pulsar, one of those strange, dense, spinning dead stars that flash with a very precise and steady rhythm, like lighthouses scattered across the galaxy. And along each line is a set of marks giving the rhythm of that particular pulsar its exact flashing rate, written in the universal language of the hydrogen atom. The idea is subtle and rather wonderful. Any sufficiently clever finder could measure the pulsars, match their rhythms to the marks on the plaque, and work out, from the pattern, both where the spacecraft came from and roughly when it was launched, since pulsars slow very gradually over time. It is a message that carries its own return address and its own date, written in the steady heartbeat of dying stars. Let that idea settle slowly, because it is quietly brilliant. How do you tell a stranger where you live when you share no words, no numbers, no map they could read? You use the stars themselves. Scattered across the galaxy are pulsars, dead stars, spinning fast, flashing with a steady beat. Each one has its own rhythm, its own exact pulse, like lighthouses, each blinking at its own rate. And no two are quite the same. So the plaque points to a handful of them, from our sun, and it writes down each one's beat. A finder could measure those same pulsars, match the rhythms, and trace the lines back to their meeting point, to us, to home. And because pulsars slow very gradually over ages, the beats also whisper when the plaque was made. So the map says both where and when, written not in any language, but in the pulse of dying stars. Will anyone ever read it? Almost certainly not. But the cleverness of it is a kind of gift on its own. We found a way to write our address in starlight. Whether anything will ever find it or read it is another matter entirely, and we will come to that. The chances are almost impossibly small. But the plaque was never really about the finding. It was about the sending. It was about a species, on a small world, at a certain moment, choosing to reach out into the dark, gently, hopefully, with a picture of two of its own and a map back home, on the smallest chance that someone, someday, might be there to see it. There are few gestures more human than that, and it is still out there, that little gold plaque, flying through the dark tonight, carrying its greeting and its map, exactly as it has for more than 50 years. Pioneer 10 did not make its journey entirely alone. It had a twin. About a year after Pioneer 10 launched, a second, nearly identical spacecraft was sent out after it, and it was called Pioneer 11. It carried its own copy of the same gold plaque, and it followed a similar path at first, out across the asteroid belt, which it also crossed safely, and on to Jupiter, which it also flew past, taking its own close look at the giant. But then the two twins parted ways, for Pioneer 11 was given a more ambitious task. After Jupiter, it was aimed across the solar system on a long path toward a second giant planet, one that no spacecraft had ever visited. Saturn, the ringed world. Pioneer 11 used Jupiter's gravity to fling itself all the way across to the far side of the solar system, and in 1979, it became the first spacecraft ever to fly close by Saturn. It passed through the ring plane, a risky move, no one being sure whether it might strike unseen debris, and it survived, and it sent back the first close data on Saturn and its rings, scouting the way, once again, for the voyagers that would follow. Two twins, two firsts. Pioneer 10, the first to Jupiter. Pioneer 11, the first to Saturn. Both of them scouts. Both of them clearing the road. It is worth holding the two of them together for a moment. Twins, built alike, sent out one after the other, each carrying the same gold plaque, and yet their fates split. One went out toward the stars past Jupiter. The other was flung across the whole solar system to Saturn. Why send two? Partly for safety. If one failed, the other might still succeed, but partly because there was so much to scout and so little known. Two machines could open two roads at once, and they did. Pioneer 10, the first to Jupiter. Pioneer 11, the first to Saturn. Between them, they mapped the dangers of the outer solar system for everything that followed, and then, one after the other, they fell quiet. Pioneer 11 first, in the 1990s. Pioneer 10 a few years later. Two twins set out together, now drifting apart in the dark, further from each other with every passing year, each alone, each carrying the same quiet greeting. They will never meet again. They never could, but they went out together once, and that counts for something, even now. And both of them, in the end, fell silent. Pioneer 11 ran low on power sooner than its twin, and the last contact with it came in the mid-1990s, some years before Pioneer 10 fell quiet. It too is drifting now, but in a different direction, headed toward a different part of the sky, out toward the constellation of the Eagle. It too carries its gold plaque. It too will drift for millions of years. Somewhere out there tonight, the two silent twins are flying apart from each other, each alone now, each carrying the same engraved greeting, each on its own long road into the dark, never to meet again. They set out together. They will end, if they end at all, unimaginably far apart. To understand why Pioneer 10 eventually fell silent, and to understand the strange little mystery that came with it, we need to look at where it got its power. Out beyond Mars, and certainly out past Jupiter, the sun is far too faint and far too distant to run a spacecraft on sunlight the way we do closer to home. Solar panels would be useless out there. So Pioneer 10, like the Voyagers after it, carried its own power source, one that needed no sunlight at all. It carried a set of devices called radioisotope thermoelectric generators. The name is long, but the idea is simple and rather beautiful. Inside each generator was a quantity of a substance called plutonium-238. This is a form of plutonium that is gently, steadily radioactive. It is not the kind used in weapons. It cannot explode. It simply sits there, and as it slowly decays, atom by atom, it gives off heat. A warm, quiet, constant heat for years and years on end. And that heat was turned directly into electricity without any moving parts by an arrangement of materials called thermocouples. When one side of these materials is hot and the other side is cold, a small electric current flows between them. The plutonium kept one side hot. The cold of deep space kept the other side cold. And out of that difference came the electricity that ran the spacecraft. There is something restful about it when you think of it. No engine, no fuel being burned, no fire, just a warm lump of slowly decaying metal, and the deep cold of space, and the quiet trickle of current in between. There is something restful in how simple it is. No engine, no moving parts, no fuel to burn, no fire to tend, just warmth and cold, and the gentle current that flows between them. Could anything be more patient? It asks for nothing. It makes no noise. It simply sits there, warm in the cold, giving what it can, year after year. But it cannot last forever. Why not? Because the warmth comes from decay. The plutonium is always breaking down, atom by atom. That is what makes the heat. And so there is always a little less of it, a little less heat each year, a little less power each year. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can refill it. You cannot reach the spacecraft. You cannot add more. All you can do is watch the warmth slowly fade, like the last coals of a fire in a room where no one can add another log. That slow fading is the clock on the whole mission. It began ticking the day Pioneer 10 launched, and it never once stopped. It is about as close to a peaceful, patient source of power as anything we have ever built. But it has one unavoidable feature, and that feature is the reason for the ending of tonight's story. The plutonium is always decaying. That is the whole point of it, the source of the heat. And so there is a little less of it every day, and it gives off a little less heat every day, and the generators make a little less electricity every day. The decline is slow, but it never stops, and it can never be refilled. Pioneer 10 began its life with only a modest amount of electrical power, and its radio transmitter, the voice it used to speak to Earth, was never very strong. It sent its signal home with a power of only about 8 watts. 8 watts is almost nothing. It is a fraction of the power of a small light bulb, and that faint signal had to cross a distance that grew, every single day, by more than 1,000,000 kilometers. So, as the years passed, 2 things happened at once. The signal grew weaker at its source as the power faded, and it grew weaker in its journey as the distance stretched. A fading whisper sent across a widening gulf. It is a wonder we heard it as long as we did, but hearing it at all across such distances revealed something strange. And this is one of the loveliest little mysteries in the history of spaceflight, a gentle puzzle that took decades to solve. As the years went by, the people tracking Pioneer 10 and its twin Pioneer 11 noticed that the spacecraft were not exactly where the equations said they should be. The difference was tiny, almost unbelievably tiny, but it was there, and it was steady. The spacecraft seemed to be slowing down, very slightly, just a little more than the known pull of the sun's gravity could account for, as though some faint, mysterious force were gently tugging them back toward the sun, ever so softly, year after year. This became known as the Pioneer anomaly, and it puzzled scientists for a very long time. The extra slowing was so small that over the whole life of the mission, it added up to a distance not much larger than the Earth itself, against billions of kilometers traveled. But it was real, and it was consistent, and no one could quite explain it. For years, people wondered whether it might be something ordinary that had simply been overlooked, or whether it might be something extraordinary. Could it be a sign that our understanding of gravity itself was slightly wrong, out here at the edge of the solar system? Could it be some unknown force? Some hint of new physics, revealed by 2 faithful old spacecraft doing nothing but drifting and reporting home? It is worth pausing on how careful and patient the search for the answer was, because it is a fine example of how science actually works, slowly and honestly. People did not simply guess. They gathered up the old tracking data, decades of it, some of it recorded on aging tapes and nearly lost, and they studied the 2 spacecraft in the finest detail. And in the end, the answer turned out to be quiet and ordinary and rather beautiful. The mysterious force was heat. The spacecraft, warmed by their plutonium generators and their own electronics, were giving off that heat unevenly, radiating a little more in one direction than another, and light and heat, when they leave an object, give it the gentlest of pushes, like the faint recoil of a lamp. That tiny, uneven glow of warmth pushing very softly against the spacecraft, was enough to explain the whole anomaly. There is no new physics in it then, no broken law of gravity, just a small machine, glowing faintly with its own warmth in the cold of space, and being nudged, ever so gently, by the light it gave off. But there is something rather moving in that, too. The spacecraft was being slowed, very slightly, by its own heat, by the very warmth that kept it alive. And as that warmth faded, over the decades, the tiny push faded with it. The mystery solved itself, in a sense, as the spacecraft cooled. The anomaly was, in the end, just the quiet fingerprint of a warm thing in a cold place, doing its best to keep going and glowing softly as it went. There is a lesson in how that mystery was solved, and it is a calming one. For years, some people hoped the anomaly was something huge, a crack in our understanding of gravity, a hint of new physics whispered by two old spacecraft. Was it? It would have been thrilling. But that is not how it turned out. Careful people gathered the old data, decades of it, some of it almost lost, on aging tapes, and they studied the spacecraft, patiently, in fine detail, and the answer was quiet and ordinary and true. It was heat. The spacecraft glowed with its own warmth, a little more one way than another, and that faint glow gave it the gentlest of pushes. No broken laws, no new force, just a warm machine in the cold, nudged softly by its own light. Is that a letdown? It should not be. It is science working exactly as it should, not leaping to the grand answer, not forcing a mystery to be more than it is, just looking carefully until the truth appears. And the truth was gentle, a warm thing glowing in the dark, slowing itself by the faintest breath of its own heat. So let us come to the last signal, gently, because it is the quiet turning point of the whole story. By the late 1990s, the official mission of Pioneer 10 had long since ended. It had done everything it was built to do, and far more. But the spacecraft was still out there, still faintly speaking. And so, now and then, the great dishes on Earth would turn to listen, partly for the science still trickling in, partly to test our ability to hear across such enormous distances, and partly, one suspects, out of a kind of affection, a reluctance to stop listening to so faithful an old traveler. By the turn of the century, hearing it at all had become a real feat. The signal arriving from Pioneer 10 was almost impossibly faint, its 8 watts spread across billions of kilometers, arriving at the dishes as the tiniest whisper, far weaker than anything you could imagine. The last time real scientific data came back was in the spring of 2002. After that, there were only the faintest of contacts, brief and weak, as the team strained to hear the dying voice. And then, on the 23rd of January, 2003, the great dishes of the Deep Space Network picked up the last signal ever received from Pioneer 10. A faint, final whisper from a spacecraft then more than 12 billion kilometers away. Think about that distance for a moment, softly. 12 billion kilometers. So far that the signal, traveling at the speed of light, the fastest thing there is, took more than 11 hours to reach the Earth. When they heard that last whisper, they were hearing something that had left the spacecraft almost half a day earlier. And it was the last. There was one more attempt, about a month later, in February of 2003, to reach out to Pioneer 10 and listen for a reply. The great dish sent its call out into the dark and waited the long hours for any answer. None came. There was only silence. The power had at last fallen too low. The voice was gone, and so quietly, with no ceremony out there in the dark, Pioneer 10 fell silent, and has remained silent ever since. It is worth being clear about what did and did not happen in that moment, because it is the gentle heart of tonight. When the last signal faded, nothing about the spacecraft itself changed. It did not stop. It did not fall. It did not slow down beyond the tiny fading nudge of its own cooling warmth. There is nothing out there to slow it. No air, no ground, nothing to catch it. It simply kept moving, exactly as it had been moving the instant before, at the same speed, in the same direction, as it will keep moving for millions of years to come. The silence was only on our end. To us, the mission ended. To the spacecraft, nothing ended at all. It became a ghost ship, whole and silent, coasting on through the dark exactly as before, carrying its gold plaque, going on. Let yourself feel how gentle that ending really was. There was no crash, no explosion, no sudden failure. What was there? Only less. A little less power, and then a little less, until the voice was simply too faint to hear. The spacecraft did not break. It did not die. It only grew too quiet for us to reach. Is that death for a machine? It does not feel like it. Death is a stopping. And nothing stopped. The spacecraft kept moving, exactly as before. The plaque kept flying. The long journey kept going. All that ended was our end of it. The listening, the thread between us and the traveler. And even that ended softly, over years, not in a moment. So there is no grave out there, no wreck, no ruin, only a whole and silent machine, drifting on, needing nothing it no longer has. It lost its voice. It did not lose its way. It never had a way to lose. It was only ever going outward, and outward it still goes. And this is the strange and beautiful thing, the thing that makes this a peaceful story rather than a sad one. The end of the signal is not the end of the journey. It is barely the beginning of it. For more than 30 years, Pioneer 10 spoke to us, and in all that time, it had not even reached the true edge of the sun's domain, let alone the space between the stars. Its whole speaking life, the crossing of the belt, the flyby of Jupiter, the decades of faithful signals, was only the very first step of a journey that will last for millions of years. When the last signal faded, Pioneer 10 was, in the truest sense, only just setting out. So where is it going? This is the question in the title, and it deserves a gentle, careful answer. Pioneer 10 is not aimed at any star in particular. It was never sent to a star. It was only sent outward, away from the sun, on the path that Jupiter's gravity gave it. But that path does point in a particular direction, out into the galaxy, and if you follow it far enough, you find that it is heading, roughly, toward a bright red star in the constellation of Taurus, the Bull. The star is called Aldebaran. You may well have seen it, without knowing its name. It is the orange-red star that marks the eye of the Bull, one of the brightest stars in the winter sky, glowing with a warm, reddish light. You may have looked at it 100 times without knowing. On a clear winter night, find the 3 stars in a row that make a hunter's belt. Follow them up and to the right. You come to a small cluster and then a bright reddish star. That is the eye of the Bull. That is Aldebaran. Its light, when it reaches your eye, is 65 years old. It left that star before nearly anyone alive today was born, and that same star is where Pioneer 10 is pointed now. Not that the little scout will ever truly arrive. Aldebaran will have drifted on by then, but the direction is real. The next time you are outside on a cold, clear night, you can look up and find that warm red point, and know something we made is heading that way. Silent, patient, in no hurry at all. It will be traveling toward that star long after you and everyone you know is gone. There is a strange comfort in that. A quiet thread from your own backyard out to a star, carried by a small machine in the dark. Aldebaran is a giant star, far larger than our sun, and much older, swollen and cooled into a deep orange in its old age. It lies about 65 light years away from us, and that is a distance so vast that it dwarfs everything we have spoken of tonight. Remember that the last signal from Pioneer 10 took 11 hours to cross 12 billion kilometers. Light from Aldebaran takes 65 years to reach us. To travel there, even at the good speed Pioneer 10 is going, will take an almost unimaginable stretch of time. About 2 million years. 2 million years of drifting, silent, through the dark, before Pioneer 10 arrives, even in the general neighborhood of that red star. And here is a gentle truth to rest on. By the time Pioneer 10 reaches the place where Aldebaran is now, Aldebaran itself will have moved on, for the stars are not fixed, but drift slowly through the galaxy, each on its own path. So Pioneer 10 is not truly chasing the star. It is only heading toward the direction where the star happens to lie today. In 2 million years, the sky will have rearranged itself. The constellations we know, the Bull, the Hunter, the Great Bear, will all have slowly dissolved and reformed into shapes no one alive today would recognize. Pioneer 10 will drift on through that changed and changing sky, aimed at a memory of where a star once was, patient and silent, in no hurry at all, because it has all the time in the world, and more. Think about how the sky itself will change. We imagine the stars as fixed. They are not. Every star is moving, slowly, on its own path through the galaxy. Over a human life, we cannot see it. The patterns seem to hold, but over hundreds of thousands of years, everything shifts. The bull will lose its shape. The hunter will come apart. The great bear will melt away into new and nameless scatterings of light. And Pioneer 10 will drift on through all of it. It will watch, if it could watch, the whole sky slowly rearrange, constellation by constellation, into shapes no human eye has ever seen. Does it chase a star then? Not really. It follows a direction, set long ago at Jupiter, toward where a star once stood. It is aimed at a memory. And it does not mind. It cannot mind. It has all the time there is, more time than the constellations themselves. It will still be drifting when every shape in tonight's sky has dissolved and reformed and dissolved again. Let the scale of that settle over you slowly, because it is one of the most peaceful thoughts there is. 2 million years. That is how long Pioneer 10 will drift before it even nears the region of Aldebaran, and that star is not truly a destination, only a direction. 2 million years ago, on the Earth, there were no modern humans at all. Our distant ancestors were just beginning to shape the first crude stone tools. There was no language as we would know it, no fire kept in hearths, no art, nothing written, nothing built. All of human history, every civilization that has ever risen and fallen, every word ever set down, fits many thousands of times over inside the span of time. It will take this one small spacecraft simply to reach the neighborhood of a single nearby star. And Aldebaran is nearby, as these things go. It is practically next door, and through all of that immense time, the spacecraft will barely change. Out in the space between the stars, there is almost nothing to wear it down. There is no air to corrode the metal. There is no rain, no weather, no seasons, no hands. There is only the deep cold and the dark and the very thin scattering of gas and dust between the stars and the rare grain of interstellar dust that the spacecraft will strike now and then as it flies. Over millions of years, those tiny impacts will slowly wear at the outer surfaces, pitting them, sandblasting them grain by grain. But it is such a gentle erosion, so slow, that Pioneer 10 will remain recognizably itself for an almost unimaginable span of time. Not thousands of years, not millions, very likely for hundreds of millions of years, and perhaps for longer still. Think about what that means, gently, without straining to hold it. That little gold plaque, bolted to the side of Pioneer 10, engraved with a man and a woman and a map back home, is very likely to outlast almost everything else that human beings have ever made. Our buildings will crumble. Our cities will be buried and ground to dust. The very continents will drift and reshape themselves. In time, the Earth itself will change beyond all recognition. And through all of that, if nothing improbable happens to intercept it, Pioneer 10 will still be out there, in the dark between the stars, still carrying its quiet greeting, drifting on. It may well be, along with its twin and the two Voyagers, among the longest-lasting evidence that we ever existed at all. Long after the Earth has forgotten us, the plaque will remember. Hold that thought, but hold it lightly. What lasts of anything we make? Stone wears down, metal rusts, cities fall and are buried and forgotten. Even mountains do not last, given enough time. But out there, in the space between the stars, there is almost nothing to wear a thing away. No air, no water, no weather, no hands, only the deep cold and the dark and the slow, faint drift of dust. So the plaque may outlast it all. Not by years, not by centuries, by hundreds of millions of years perhaps, long enough to outlive the Earth itself. Is that not a strange kind of comfort? A small sheet of engraved gold, the size of a license plate, may be the most lasting thing our species ever makes. Not our monuments, not our cities, a quiet picture of two people and a hand raised in greeting, sailing on through the dark, long after the world that drew it has changed past all knowing. There is no sadness in that, if you turn it the right way in the dark. It is a kind of gentle immortality, of the most modest sort. We built a small machine, and we sent it out with a picture of ourselves and a map to our home, and that picture will endure, quietly, for longer than our world will hold together, whether or not anyone ever finds it. The finding was never really the point. The point was the sending. The point was that a species, on a small blue world, at a certain moment in its history, looked up at the dark, and instead of being only afraid of it, chose to reach into it, gently, with a drawing of two of its own, and a hand raised in greeting. Pioneer 10 is that gesture, made solid, still traveling, and it will go on making it, on our behalf, long after every hand that built it is gone. It helps, too, to remember what Pioneer 10 was for, and how much it gave us for so little. It was a scout. That was its whole nature. It went first, into the places no one was sure could be crossed, and it took the risks, and it suffered the surprises, so that everything which came after could travel more safely. It showed us that the asteroid belt was passable. It showed us the fierce radiation around Jupiter, so the Voyagers could be built to survive it. Its twin showed us the way to Saturn. Every great mission to the outer solar system that followed, the Voyagers, and the later spacecraft that orbited Jupiter and Saturn for years, stood on the shoulders of these first small scouts. They walked because Pioneer ran ahead into the dark. There is something quietly noble in being first, and worth resting on. Did Pioneer 10 know it was first? No. It felt no pride, no fear, no loneliness. It simply went where it was sent, and did what it was built for, and carried on when the work was done. but we can feel, on its behalf, what being first really means. To be first is to have no map, no footsteps to follow, no one who has gone before to tell you the way is safe. To be first is to find out, by going, whether a thing can even be done. That was Pioneer 10 for all of us. It went into the blank space on the map. It took the surprises and the blows so the blank could become a road. And then, its scouting done, did it turn back? It did not. It kept going, further into the blank, on and on, still the pioneer, still the first, further out than anything had ever gone. It is out there still, the first of us, leading even now, with no one behind it for billions of miles. And it did all of this with technology that seems, by today's measure, almost impossibly simple. A spacecraft that weighed only a few 100 kilograms, a transmitter of 8 watts, a memory so small it could hold almost nothing at all. No modern computer, no clever software sent up to fix its problems, just a robust, spinning, carefully made machine, doing a few things, and doing them well enough to cross the solar system and open a road that had never been opened before. There is a quiet lesson in that, about how much can be done with how little, when it is done with care. But it is a lesson for the daytime. Tonight it is just a gentle fact to rest against, as the old scout drifts on through the dark. Sometimes people ask whether anyone will ever actually find Pioneer 10, whether that little gold plaque will ever be seen by any other eyes. And the honest answer is that it is extraordinarily unlikely, and that this does not really matter at all. Space is mostly empty, emptier than any word for empty can truly convey. The distances between the stars are so vast, and the spacecraft so small, that the chance of Pioneer 10 ever passing close to anything, let alone anything able to notice it, is so tiny that it is barely worth calculating. The plaque was never a serious attempt at communication. It was something else. It was a gesture of hope, made without any expectation of reply. But let yourself imagine it anyway, softly, as a kind of bedtime story, because it is a lovely thing to drift asleep on. Imagine that somewhere, sometime, in a future so distant that our whole civilization is less than a rumor, something out there in the dark comes upon this small, tumbling, ancient machine. It has been flying for 100 million years, or 500 million, its metal pitted and scarred by the slow rain of interstellar dust. But the plaque is still there, still readable, still carrying its patient greeting. And whoever, or whatever, finds it, if they are clever and curious, might study the diagram of the hydrogen atom and measure the pulsars and follow the lines back and work out, from the steady rhythms of those dying stars, both where this little machine came from and roughly when it set out. They would learn that there had been a world, and that on it there had been beings who looked something like the 2 figures on the plaque, who raised a hand in greeting, and who reached out into the dark, gently, hopefully, wanting only to say that they had once been here. That is the whole of the message, underneath the diagrams. We were here. We were here, and we looked up, and we were not only afraid. Is that not the bravest thing a small and fragile species can do? To face a silence that vast, and to answer it, not with fear, but with a greeting. We did not know if anyone was out there. We still do not know. The odds are almost nothing. And we sent the message anyway. Think of a bottle thrown into the sea. Do you throw it because you expect an answer? No. You throw it because the throwing says something true about you, that you hoped, that you reached, that you would rather speak into the dark than shrink from it. Pioneer 10 is that bottle, that gesture made solid, and it is still out there, still carrying it tonight. whether or not the ocean holds anyone at all to find it. The finding was never the point. The sending was the point. The sending was always the point. That is the whole of the message, really, underneath the diagrams and the map. We were here. We were here, and we looked up, and we were not only afraid. We built machines, and we sent them out as far as we could throw them, into the largest silence there is, on the small chance that the silence might one day hold someone to receive them, and knowing, even as we did it, that it almost certainly never would. There are not many gestures more human than that, and it is still going on, right now, tonight, far beyond the planets, a small, silent machine carrying that greeting outward, at this very moment, whether or not anyone will ever be there to see it. There is a tenderness, too, in how the people on Earth held on to Pioneer 10 for as long as they possibly could. The mission was declared over, officially, years before the last signal came. And yet, they kept listening. Every so often, a great dish would turn toward the fading spacecraft and strain to catch its whisper, long after there was any real need to. Partly, it was a test of how far we could hear, but partly, one senses, it was simple affection. It is hard to say goodbye to a faithful old traveler. It is hard to be the one who turns off the receiver for the last time and admits that the voice is gone. So they listened and listened, past the point of necessity, until the whisper was truly too faint to hear at all, and then, gently, they let it go. And letting go, in the end, is what this story is really about, and it is a gentle kind of letting go, the kind worth carrying into sleep. The signal was only the thread that connected us to the traveler. For 30 years that thread held, and we could feel, through it, the little machine still out there, still working, still on its way. But a thread like that cannot hold forever. The distance grows too great, the voice grows too faint, and one day the thread is simply too long and too thin to carry anything at all, and it lets go, softly, without a sound. But letting go of the thread does not pull the traveler back. It does not stop the journey. It only means that the traveler goes on alone now, into a distance we were never going to be able to follow anyway. The connection ends. The voyage continues. That is not a tragedy. That is just what happens when something goes further than we can reach. It is worth remembering, as well, that Pioneer 10 is not entirely alone out there, even now. There is its twin, Pioneer 11, silent since the 1990s, drifting off toward the Eagle. There are the two Voyagers, which followed a few years later, one of them still faintly speaking as this story is told, both carrying their golden records. And there is one more fast machine, sent out past Pluto in more recent years, still young, still working, on its own long road outward. So there are, scattered through the dark in different directions, a small handful of silent and speaking travelers, humanity's first pebbles tossed into an enormous sea. None of them will ever meet. None will ever turn back. Each carries some small token of the world that made it. And Pioneer 10 was the very first of them, the one that went out ahead of all the rest, the scout who opened the road and then kept walking down it, into the dark, alone. There is one thing about this journey that no words ever quite capture, and it is worth resting against all the same, because the mind grows calm when it stops trying to grasp it. It is the sheer size of the distances. We say Pioneer 10 was 12 billion kilometers away when it fell silent, and the number is so large, it means almost nothing. So try it a different way. Light, which can cross the entire width of the Earth in a small fraction of a single second, which reaches us from the moon in about a second and a quarter, which takes about 8 minutes to travel here from the sun, took more than 11 hours to reach us from Pioneer 10. The same light that laps the whole Earth in an eye blink had to travel for the better part of a day to bridge the gap to this one small machine. And even that gap, so wide that light itself grows weary crossing it, is a tiny thing, a first footstep, next to the distance Pioneer 10 still has to go. The star it is heading toward, Aldebaran, is 65 light-years away. Light from it takes 65 years to reach us. Pioneer 10, moving far slower than light, will take 2 million years to make a similar journey. And Aldebaran, remember, is one of the nearer stars, practically a neighbor. Beyond it lie thousands and millions and billions more, scattered across a galaxy so wide that light takes 100,000 years just to cross from one side of it to the other. Pioneer 10, for all its astonishing journey, is still, on that scale, barely at the edge of our own doorstep, only just stepping off the porch into a night that stretches on almost without end. And yet, it is stepping off it. That is the wonder, and it is worth holding gently as you rest. For all of human history, we were bound to one world. Then, for a brief while, to a few nearby worlds. And now, drifting out there in the true dark, in the space beyond the planets, there are a handful of small things that we made, with our own hands, that have left all of that behind. Pioneer 10 was the first of them to cross the belt, the first to pass a giant planet, the first to be flung outward toward the stars. Not a person, not yet, and perhaps not for a very long time, but a thing we made, carrying a picture of us, out past the edge of the only home we have ever known. Whatever else is true of us, we did that. We reached out further than we had any right to expect, with a machine simpler than the phone beside your bed, and we opened the road. Let the timescales widen now, one last time, as far as they will go, because there is a deep peace in the very largest numbers when you stop trying to seize them and simply let them wash over you. Pioneer 10 will still be drifting long after everyone now alive is gone. It will still be drifting when the last person who ever knew its name has been forgotten. It will still be drifting as the galaxy itself turns, slowly, carrying all its stars, and this one small, silent machine among them, around and around its vast, slow wheel, each single turn taking hundreds of millions of years. It will still be drifting when the sun, 4 or 5 billion years from now, begins to swell and change, and the Earth becomes something we would not recognize. It will outlast the sun. It may, in some pitted and ancient form, outlast the Earth itself, and it will be silent through all of it. That is the part to make peace with, and it is not a hard peace to make, once you turn it gently in the dark. The silence is not an ending. It is simply the natural state of a traveler that has gone too far to call home. Pioneer 10 spent the first small fraction of its journey within our reach, sending home its whispers, and we were lucky, astonishingly lucky, to have that time with it, to see through it the empty belt and the storms of Jupiter and the great magnetic field of the giant. But that time was always going to be brief, next to the true length of the road. The signal was the childhood of the mission. The silence is the long life that follows, spent out in the dark, alone, going on. And the going on is the point. The going on was always the point. It can be a strange thing to think about, lying here in the warm and the dark, that there is a made thing, a human thing, out there right now, in the emptiness beyond the planets, moving through the night at tens of thousands of kilometers an hour, and yet so far away that it seems, from here, not to move at all. It has been out there through every day of your life. It was out there when you were born. It was out there through every ordinary afternoon and every long night you have ever known, quietly crossing the dark, never resting, never stopping, needing nothing, asking nothing. And it will still be out there tomorrow, and next year, and long after tomorrow and next year have lost all meaning. There is a strange companionship in that, if you let yourself feel it. We are never quite as alone as we think. Somewhere out in the dark, our first scout is still flying, carrying our picture, on our behalf, forever. Come back for a moment to that little gold plaque, because it holds something worth resting on tonight. When the small team sat down to design it in just a few weeks, they had to make a strange and enormous choice. They had to decide what to say in a single picture to a mind that might share nothing at all with us. And what they chose is quietly revealing. They did not engrave our weapons or our conflicts or our failures. They engraved two human figures, standing calmly, one with a hand raised in greeting. They engraved where we live and when we sent the message and how large we are. They chose in the end to send a simple, peaceful hello. Here we are. This is what we look like. This is where we come from. We mean you no harm. We only wanted you to know that we were here. And in choosing that, they were really holding up a mirror to ourselves. Given the chance to speak for the whole of humanity, into the dark, forever, they chose to be gentle. They chose to greet, not to boast, not to warn, not to threaten. It is easy sometimes to be discouraged about our own kind, about all the ways we fall short. But there is this too, drifting out there in the dark as evidence. When we were asked once to say who we were to the universe, we chose a raised hand and a quiet hello. That is worth remembering on the nights when the world seems heavy. Somewhere out past the planets, our first message to the stars is a picture of two people and a friendly greeting, flying on, patiently, for 1 billion years. There is a gentleness, too, in the very idea of being first. Pioneer 10 did not know it was first. It felt no pride, no fear, no loneliness. It simply went where it was sent, and did what it was built to do, and carried on when its work was finished. But we can feel, on its behalf, something of what it means to be the one who goes ahead into the dark. To be the first is to be the one without a map, the one who cannot follow anyone else's footsteps, the one who must find out, by going, whether the way is even passable. Pioneer 10 was that, for all of us. It went into the unknown so that the unknown could become the known. And having done that, having turned a frightening blank space on the map into a road that others could travel, it did not turn back, or rest, or stop. It simply kept going, further into the blank, on, still the pioneer, still the first, further out than anything had ever gone. Let us take a slow, imagined journey now, out to where the spacecraft is, the way you might drift out along a thought before sleep, not to learn anything, only to be there for a while in the quiet. Begin here, in this room, in the warm and the dark, and rise gently up through the ceiling, up above the house, above the town, until the lights of the whole region spread out below you like scattered embers, and then dim and shrink as you keep rising, until the curve of the earth appears, blue and white and turning slowly in the sunlight. Keep going, softly, past the moon, until the earth itself shrinks to a small blue marble behind you, and then to a bright point, and then to something you must look for to find. Out past the orbit of Mars, rust-red and small. Out through the wide, nearly empty belt of asteroids that Pioneer 10 crossed first, so long ago, seeing almost nothing but a few floating grains, out toward Jupiter, vast and banded and stormy, where the little scout took its blows of radiation and was flung onward toward the stars. And then out past Jupiter, into the long dark where the sun is no longer a disk, but only the brightest of the stars behind you, giving no warmth you could feel. And still you must go further, much further, out past where the Voyagers crossed into interstellar space, out along Pioneer 10's own lonely path, which peeled away from the others long ago, aimed toward the bull, toward the red eye of Aldebaran, out into the deep quiet between the stars, where the little machine is drifting now, silent, cold, and whole. And there, ahead of you, small against the enormous night, is the spacecraft itself. Its wide dish still turned, out of long habit, roughly back toward the distant sun, that bright point among so many others. Its gold plaque catching, very faintly, the light of 1 billion far-off stars. It is not struggling. It is not afraid. It is simply moving, steadily, without effort, through the dark, exactly as it has for more than 50 years. Fly alongside it for a while, in the silence. There is no sound out here, of course, no air to carry any sound, only the deep quiet of the space between the stars. The sun is one bright point behind you both, one star among thousands, sharp and steady and unblinking. The galaxy stretches across the dark in a great faint band of soft light, countless stars too far and too many to separate. And the little scout flies on through all of it, unhurried, uncomplaining, carrying its picture of home, going where nothing from Earth had ever gone before it. You do not need to follow it any further. Let it go on ahead of you, softly, into the dark, growing smaller and smaller, until it is only a point, and then not even that, swallowed gently by the enormous night, still flying, still whole, still at peace. It is worth spending a quiet while on the people who made this small machine, because their story is a gentle one to rest against. The team that built Pioneer 10 worked in an age when much of this was still new and uncertain, when no one could be sure that a spacecraft sent so far would survive at all. They were building, in many cases, the first of their kind, the first machine meant to cross the belt, the first meant to face the radiation of Jupiter, and they had to imagine, in advance, every danger it might meet, because once it left the Earth, they could never touch it again. They worked with tools that would seem almost quaint today, with slide rules and early computers and a great deal of careful hand calculation, and yet they built something that outlasted every expectation they had for it. They gave the little spacecraft a design meant above all to be sturdy and simple, because simple things fail less often, and a machine bound for the far edge of the solar system would have to look after itself for a very long time. They chose the slow, steady spin that kept it pointed the right way without any fuss. They chose the patient warmth of the nuclear generators over fragile panels of sunlight. And they built in as little as they could that might go wrong, knowing that every part they added was another part that might one day break, unreachable, 1 billion kilometers away. There is a wisdom in that restraint, a wisdom that the long life of the spacecraft proved again and again over the decades that followed. And when the mission was formally over, when the budgets moved on to newer and grander things, a small number of people kept caring for the old scout anyway, listening for its fading whisper long after there was any need to, simply because it seemed wrong to stop. They turned the great dishes toward it now and then, across the widening years, and strained to catch the faint tone still crossing the dark, and each time they heard it, there was a quiet gladness in it, the gladness of knowing that the old traveler was still out there, still faithful, still on its way. It is a very human thing, that reluctance to say goodbye to something that has served so long and so well, and it is worth honoring on a quiet night as part of the story. There is a deeper thing here too, something worth turning over slowly as the mind grows heavy. Pioneer 10 teaches a kind of patience that is hard to come by in an ordinary life. It measures its journey not in hours or days, but in millions of years, and it is entirely untroubled by the wait. It has nowhere it needs to be by any particular time. It is not late, and it cannot be late, because it keeps no schedule but the slow turning of the galaxy. There is something restful in imagining that kind of patience, the patience of a thing that simply goes on, steadily, without hurry, without worry, across spans of time so vast that a whole human life is less than a single step of the way. We spend so much of our days rushing, measuring, counting the minutes, anxious about being on time. And out there, all the while, a small machine has been drifting through the dark for half a century, and it has covered, in all that time, only the tiniest fraction of its road, and it does not mind in the least. It will still be drifting, just as calmly, long after the last of our clocks has stopped. There is a gift in that thought, if you let it settle over you. The universe is patient beyond all our imagining, and we are a part of that universe, and tonight at least, there is nowhere you need to be either, and nothing you need to hurry toward, and all the time in the world to simply rest. And perhaps that is the truest thing the old scout has to give us, now that its science is long finished, and its voice is long silent. Not its measurements of Jupiter, valuable as those were, not even the picture on its plaque, lovely as that is, but a way of feeling our own place in the great sweep of things, gently, without fear. We are small, and our lives are short, and the distances out there are almost beyond comprehension, and yet we reached into them. We made a thing that crossed them, and is crossing them still. We are small, and we reached far anyway, and both of those are true at once, and there is a deep and quiet steadiness in holding them together as you drift toward sleep. Consider, as you lie here, how completely the outer solar system was transformed from a mystery into a set of real places, and how much of that transformation began with this one small scout. Before Pioneer 10, the giant planets were little more than points of light and clever guesses, studied only from the bottom of our own atmosphere, blurred and uncertain and far away. We did not truly know what the belt was like, or whether it could be crossed, or how fierce the radiation around Jupiter might be, or whether the great planets held any surprises worth the journey. All of that was still waiting to be discovered, out there in the dark, when this small machine set off to find out. And in the decades that followed, world after world came into focus, each revealed in turn by the machines that Pioneer had scouted the way for. The storms of Jupiter resolved into churning rivers of cloud, and its moons became worlds of ice and fire, some with hidden oceans, some with erupting volcanoes. The rings of Saturn resolved into countless delicate bands, and its great haze-wrapped moon became a target of its own for later missions. Uranus and Neptune, the far blue giants, gave up their secrets to spacecraft that flew where Pioneer had first shown the way was open. And behind all of it, quietly, stood the small scouts that had gone first and proved that the journey could be made at all. It is easy to forget the ones who go first, once the road they opened has become familiar and well-traveled. We remember the grand missions, the famous pictures, the later triumphs. But none of those would have come so soon, or so safely, without the patient work of the machines that scouted ahead into the unknown, taking the risks so that others would not have to. Pioneer 10 was the first of those, the one that crossed the frightening belt and survived the giant and proved that the outer solar system was ours to explore. Everything that came after carried a little of that first crossing with it, whether anyone remembered it or not. There is a kind of quiet dignity in being the one who goes first and is then, gently, forgotten. The scout does not do its work for glory. It does its work so that the way will be open, and then it steps aside, or rather, it keeps going, out past the edge of the map, while the world's attention turns to those who follow. Pioneer 10 asked for nothing and received in the end rather little fame compared to the famous voyagers that came after it. But it was there first. It went into the dark first. And it is, tonight, still the pioneer, still further along its lonely road than we sometimes remember, carrying its quiet greeting out toward the stars while the world sleeps. And that word, pioneer, is worth turning over gently as you settle, because it was chosen with care. A pioneer is one who goes ahead of the settlement into country that has no roads, to find out whether people can live there, or pass through, or reach the far side. It is a word full of hope, and full of risk, and full of a certain loneliness. For the pioneer is always, by definition, ahead of everyone else, alone at the front of things. That is what this small machine was named for, and it has lived up to the name more completely than almost anything else we have ever made. It went ahead of us, and it is ahead of us still, out at the very front of everything human beings have ever reached, alone in the dark, leading. There is, finally, a strange and gentle companionship in knowing it is out there, even now, even silent. It has been drifting through the dark for longer than many people listening have been alive. It was out there on every ordinary day of your life, on every quiet afternoon and every long night, patiently crossing the emptiness, needing nothing from anyone, asking nothing of anyone, simply going on. It is out there right now, as you lie here in the warm and the dark, moving through the night at a speed that would seem impossible on Earth, and yet so far away that it seems, from here, not to move at all. And it will still be out there tomorrow, and next year, and for millions of years to come, our first scout, our furthest traveler, quietly leading the way into a dark we have only just begun to enter. Let your mind rest, for a while, on the sheer length of the road ahead, not as a fact to grasp, but as a feeling to sink into. When we say that Pioneer 10 will reach the neighborhood of Aldebaran in about 2 million years, we are speaking of a span of time so far beyond ordinary experience that the mind can only stand at the edge of it and look. 2 million years ago, the ancestors who would one day become us were just beginning to shape the crudest of stone tools. On the plains of a continent none of them had a name for. There was no writing, no farming, no cities, no memory of any kind that could reach across the ages. Everything that we think of as human history has happened in a sliver of time so thin, next to that journey, that it would scarcely register at all. And the spacecraft will simply drift through all of it, unchanged and untroubled, at the same steady speed, in the same steady direction, as the ages pile up behind it. Whole species will rise and fall on Earth in the time it takes Pioneer 10 to cross even a small part of the gap to that one nearby star. The face of our planet will change, its coastlines redrawn, its ice come and gone and come again, its living things transformed beyond recognition, and the little machine will not have noticed, because it will be far too distant to notice anything, coasting on through a dark that barely changes from 1 million years to the next. There is something in that which quiets the mind rather than troubling it, if you let it. A great deal of what we worry about comes down to time, to not having enough of it, about being late, about the days slipping past too quickly. And here is a thing we made, out in the dark, for which time means almost nothing at all, which has all the ages of the galaxy to make its journey, and which is in no hurry whatsoever. To rest your attention on it, even for a moment, is to borrow a little of that vast patience, to feel your own small hurries loosen and fall away, to remember that the universe is in no rush, and that you, tonight, do not need to be either. Think, too, of how the spacecraft will change, or rather, how little it will change, across all that time. Out in the space between the stars, there is almost nothing to touch it, no wind to weather it, no rain to rust it, no hands to move it, no seasons to mark the passing years. There is only the deep and steady cold, and the dark, and the thin, faint drift of dust between the stars, a grain of which the spacecraft meets only rarely, and which wears it down so slowly that whole ages pass between one tiny change and the next. And so it will remain, recognizably itself, for a span of time that dwarfs the age of our whole species, its gold plaque still legible, its shape still that of a machine made by careful hands on a small blue world, drifting on, through the long, patient dark. If you had to choose a single image to carry down into sleep from all of this, you could do worse than that one. A small, silent, unchanging thing, far out in the quiet, moving so slowly against the vastness that it seems almost still, and yet always moving, always going on, calm and cold and whole, needing nothing, fearing nothing, at peace in the deep and endless night. It is a restful thing to think of, that far-off traveler, so untroubled by everything that troubles us, so patient, so quiet, so free. And you can let your own mind settle into that same stillness now, that same gentle motion, that same deep peace as the story draws, softly, toward its close. There is one more quiet thought worth resting on before we gather the story up, and it concerns the two small figures engraved on the plaque, the man and the woman standing calmly with a hand raised in greeting. Those figures were meant to stand for all of us, for every person who has ever lived, and choosing how to draw them was no simple thing. The artist had to suggest a whole species in a few clean lines, without any words, in a way that a mind knowing nothing of us might still somehow read as friendly, and open, and unafraid. It is a strange and touching assignment to draw the portrait of everyone at once, and to send that portrait out into a dark that may never hold a single eye to see it. And whatever one thinks of the particular choices they made in those few rushed weeks, the spirit behind them is worth honoring, because it was a spirit of welcome rather than warning. They could have engraved something fearful, or boastful, or defensive. Instead, they drew two people standing quietly, one hand lifted in the oldest and simplest of greetings, a gesture that says, across any distance and any gulf of understanding, here we are, and we mean you no harm. That small raised hand, flying now through the dark for more than 50 years, is a kind of promise, made by a young species still learning what it is, that when we finally spoke into the silence, we chose to speak gently. It is worth remembering as well how little we knew of our own place in things when that plaque was made, and how much of the reaching was an act of pure hope. We did not know, in those years, whether planets around other stars were common or rare, and so we did not know whether there were many places where life might arise, or almost none. We still do not know whether we are alone. The plaque was launched into that uncertainty, into a universe whose friendliness to life was, and remains, an open question, and it was launched anyway, as an act of faith that reaching outward is better than staying silent, whatever the answer turns out to be. And in a way, the not knowing is part of what makes the gesture beautiful. If we knew for certain that someone was out there waiting, sending the plaque would be simply practical, a letter to a known address. It is because we do not know, because the odds are so slight, because the dark may well be empty of anyone at all, that the sending becomes something finer than practicality. It becomes an expression of who we are when no one is watching and no reward is promised. We reached out into a silence that owed us nothing and asked for nothing back. And that is a truer measure of a species than almost anything it does when it expects to be seen. So the little machine carries all of that with it, out into the dark tonight, whether or not it is ever found, whether or not the universe holds anyone at all to find it. It carries our first raised hand. It carries our hope and our uncertainty and our quiet decision to be gentle. And it will carry those things onward, faithfully, long after every hand that ever waved on earth is gone, out among the changing stars, for as long as the galaxy will hold it. It is worth taking a slow breath, too, over the simple strangeness of the fact at the center of all this, the fact hidden in the title itself. Pioneer 10 is still out there, not as a memory, not as a story in a book, but as a real object, a thing of metal and gold with a definite position in space at this exact moment, moving through the dark as you lie here in your bed. It is not a symbol. It is a place you could, in principle, point to in the sky, a direction you could name, a spot in the great emptiness where a made thing is passing through the night right now. That it should still be there, after all these years, so far beyond our reach and yet so undeniably real, is one of those facts that grows stranger and gentler the longer you hold it. We tend to think of the things we make as belonging to us, as staying near us, as wearing out and being thrown away and forgotten. But this one slipped that pattern entirely. It left, and it did not come back, and it did not wear out in any way that matters, and it will not be forgotten as long as anyone keeps telling its story. It became, in a sense, independent of us, a thing we made that no longer needs us, that carries on without us, that will outlast us and keep going regardless. There are not many things a person can make that will still be recognizably themselves in 100 million years. And yet we have made a few, and this was the first of them, and it is out there tonight, quietly proving it. So when you think of it now, in these last quiet minutes before sleep, do not think of it as lost, or as sad, or as gone. Think of it as simply elsewhere, very far elsewhere, doing exactly what it was made to do, which was to go and to keep going, and to carry a small piece of us out into the dark. It is not waiting to be rescued. It is not calling out to be found. It is perfectly at peace, if a machine can be said to be at peace, drifting on through the endless night with nothing left to do but continue, which is the one thing it will always, effortlessly, do. And perhaps, on a quiet night like this one, there is something companionable in that, something almost restful to share. You are lying still in the warm, letting the day fall away, asking nothing of anyone and needing nothing more than this. And far out in the dark, the old scout is doing very much the same, at rest in its own long motion, carried gently onward by the momentum of a journey begun before you were born. Two quiet travelers, in your own ways, both simply letting yourselves be carried through the night. So let us gather the whole of it together now, gently, the way you draw a blanket up at the end of a long day, before we let the story fade into sleep. A small spacecraft, built in the early 1970s, meant to last only 2 years. Launched in the spring of 1972, faster than anything had ever been launched, out toward a frontier no machine had crossed. Sent first, as a scout, to answer a frightening question. Could a spacecraft cross the asteroid belt and survive? For 7 months it flew through the belt, and it came out the other side unharmed, and it taught us that the great feared barrier was nearly empty after all. Then on to Jupiter, at the end of 1973, the first machine ever to fly close by the giant. It plunged through the fierce belts of radiation, took a dose that should have destroyed it, and survived, and sent home the first close pictures of the largest planet, and scouted the danger for the voyagers still to come. And at Jupiter, it was flung outward, by the giant's own gravity, onto a path that would carry it up and out of the solar system, toward the stars, on a journey with no end. It carried with it a small gold plaque, our first message to the dark, a picture of 2 people and a map back home. It had a twin, Pioneer 11, which followed it out, crossed the belt too, flew past Jupiter too, and went on to become the first spacecraft ever to visit Saturn, before falling silent in the 1990s and drifting off toward the Eagle. And Pioneer 10 flew on and on, its nuclear power slowly fading, its faint 8-watt voice growing weaker every year as the distance grew. It gave us a small, lovely mystery, the Pioneer anomaly, a tiny, unexplained slowing that puzzled us for decades, until we understood at last that it was only the gentle push of the spacecraft's own warmth, glowing softly in the cold. And then, in January of 2003, more than 12 billion kilometers away, it sent its last faint whisper across the dark, a signal 11 hours old by the time we heard it, and then it fell silent, and has been silent ever since. But it did not stop. It never stops. It drifts on now, a silent ghost ship, whole and cold and patient, out toward the red star Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, which it will reach the neighborhood of in about 2 million years, by which time the sky itself will have rearranged into shapes we would not know. It will drift for hundreds of millions of years, its gold plaque enduring, very likely outlasting the Earth itself, carrying its gentle greeting onward long after the world that sent it has changed beyond all knowing. That is the whole shape of it. That is where Pioneer 10 has been, and where it is going, and what becomes of it now that it is silent. You do not need to hold any of it now. Let the dates go, and the names, and the distances. Let the asteroid belt and Jupiter drift away into the dark. Let the numbers dissolve. Keep only the one soft image, if you keep anything at all, of a small machine, far out in the quiet beyond the planets, cold and silent and whole, drifting on through the dark, carrying a little gold picture of home, going on and on and on, needing nothing, afraid of nothing, at peace in the deep night, exactly as you are about to be. So let the whole journey settle now, slowly, the way stillness settles over a room at the very end of the day. We have been a long way tonight, out past the belt, out past Jupiter, out along a lonely path toward a distant red star, and forward into a future so vast the mind can only brush against it. It is time to come home now, and to rest. Come back the long way, gently, without any hurry. Back from the deep dark between the stars, where the little scout flies on without you. Back along its lonely path, back toward the sun, which grows from a point into a disk again. Back past Jupiter, vast and banded and stormy. Back through the wide empty belt of asteroids. Back past small red Mars. Back toward the one warm point of blue light that is growing, slowly, ahead of you, into a world. Come down toward the earth, that small blue marble wrapped in white, turning quietly in the sunlight, the only home any of us has ever known. Down through the thin, soft layer of air, down toward the part of the world where night has fallen, where the lights of the towns glow warm against the dark, down toward your own country, your own town, your own street, down toward this building and this room and the quiet bed where you are lying, warm and safe and still. Feel the weight of your body against the bed, held gently by the Earth's own quiet pull, the same kind of pull that once caught Pioneer 10 at Jupiter and flung it toward the stars, holding you now softly in place, exactly where you are meant to be. Feel how still the room is. Feel how little you have to do right now in this moment. Nothing needs guiding. Nothing needs correcting. Nothing needs your attention at all. Like the spacecraft far out in the dark, you can simply drift now, needing nothing, carried along without effort, at rest. Let your breathing slow and deepen, all on its own. There is no hurry in the breath. It comes and it goes, patient as a signal crossing the dark, in and out. And with each breath out, let a little more of the day go with it. Let the dates go, and the numbers, and the names of far worlds and far stars. Let Jupiter drift away. Let the belt dissolve. Let even the little spacecraft go on ahead without you, into its long silence, while you stay here, in the warm, and let go. Feel your shoulders soften and settle. Feel the small tightness in your jaw let go. Feel your hands grow heavy and still. Feel the long muscles of your legs grow warm and loose, sinking into the bed. There is nothing out there in all that vast dark that needs anything from you tonight. The spacecraft will drift on whether or not you think of it. The galaxy will turn, slowly, whether or not you are awake. The little gold plaque will carry its greeting onward through the deep future, whether or not you remember a single word of this. You can set all of it down now. You can let all of it go. There is a great peace, if you let yourself feel it, in being one small warm point of life on a small warm world, held by the quiet pull of your own planet, while far out in the dark, the things we made drift on and on. You do not have to go with them. You do not have to reach that far tonight. Your reaching, for now, can be only as far as the edge of sleep, which is very close and very soft, and asks nothing of you, but that you let yourself arrive there. The little scout is out there still, drifting through the night, cold and silent and whole, at peace in the deep dark, needing nothing, afraid of nothing, simply going on toward its distant star. And you are here, in the warm, in the quiet, needing nothing now either, afraid of nothing now, simply resting. There is no distance between you and it that matters anymore tonight. You are both, in your own ways, carried gently through the dark, and both, in your own ways, at peace. Let the last of your thoughts grow soft and dim, like a signal fading gently into the quiet background of the universe. There is nothing more to follow tonight. There is nothing more to understand. There is only the warm dark and the slow breath and the soft weight of your body at rest, and somewhere far beyond it all, one small silent machine drifting on through the night, carrying a picture of home outward, forever. Rest now. Let it all drift. Let yourself be carried softly into sleep. Good night.